How did finally learning how to cry change your life?
Well, my tears taught me that I'm human. So often growing up
Yeah.
in my community, especially as men, as Father Roy had shared earlier, we're trained by misconstrued mantras like big boys don't cry. What doesn't kill you
Big
can
boy.
only make you stronger, and no pain, no gain. And as a result of that, we repress our emotions. And then, Oprah, when I discovered that tears not only contain 98% water, but also stress hormones that get excreted from
Yes.
our bodies when we
That's
cry.
right.
So my
Mm-hmm.
work with boys, Oprah, here it is, we're telling boys not to cry, and then we wonder why when they get to a certain age that they don't know how to express themselves. So for me, when I was able to, shed the misleading mantras and really understand that tears made me human, it finally allowed me to stop my trauma from time traveling and then to grieve without embarrassment, without shame. I was able to finally love myself, my family, and my friends without limits, and most importantly, escape emotional incarceration.
I love that. Escape emotional incarceration. And didn't it open up so many avenues? I mean, I was just having a conversation recently with the gentleman who runs the Hoffman Institute, who was saying that he was raised to as a young boy not to cry, and that many years later, when his mother was dying and he was crying in the car about that, his father, who had taught him not to cry, said, "Can you teach me how to cry?
Wow.
Can you teach me how to cry?" And he said he did. He was able to help his father, told his father that when he start to feeling the emotion, instead of shutting down, just open up and go into that feeling and allow it to take over, and to know that it's only going to last for 10 or 15 minutes, that you're not going to be crying the rest of your life. And that his father learning how to cry during the death of his wife that he'd been married to all those years really changed the grieving process, but also opened up an aperture for joy. So I've shared that story with you to just ask that question. Did your learning to cry also open up the aperture for experiencing other emotions in your relationships?
Oh, absolutely, Oprah. I often teach my boys and men that I work with that we tend to gravitate toward the 8 box of crayons versus the 64 box. And I compare those two emotions that we're both
Wow.
given as
That's
men and
good.
women, but we're typically as men, as Father Roy tells you, we go towards anger, frustration, and fear.
Uh,
But what about the other emotions? And so,
Yeah.
being married 26 years now, I had to learn that when my wife is requesting violet, all I could give her was purple. When she wanted lime, I had to figure out a way to make green and yellow match the color. And I said, wait a minute, this is a major issue with communication. And I learned how to not only process my emotions, but become a verbal processor, expressing the true feeling behind the emotion instead of always going to the surface emotion, which I call anger. And so I was repressing all of this pain and working with boys. I realized later on why the word thug was really popular. And I made an acronym because what I saw wasn't a gangster. I saw a traumatized human unable to grieve. And so
Ooh.
when I helped them process their pain and emotions and gave them the freedom to feel and show them the power of tears, they were finally able to release and grieve and live better and fuller lives.
Boy, that made my eyes water. Thug is a traumatized human unable to grieve. Wow,
Yes.
Reorder.
that reorders the meaning and definition of that word. Thank you for sharing that, Jason. What was your question? Did you have a question for Father Rohr?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you, as someone who also works closely with men, helping them process their emotions and release trauma, I'm curious because I read some of your work with men in retreats and helping them open up. What practices and approaches have you, found to be the most effective in helping men be transparent and emotionally open?
The most universal one, discovered by all of the world religions, is some form of mindfulness that you see the games your mind plays. You have to observe it. It sounds so passive, but once you see it, you can't not see it. That you prefer the negative, or you prefer problem solving, or you prefer being antagonistic, scapegoating others, Once you recognize your patterns, you see they're everywhere. For years up at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, where I live, I gave these 5-day events called Men's Rites of Passage. And the turning point, I'm not exaggerating, for many men was on the third day, which we call the day of grief. And I had learned this, but I'm not making this up. It sounds like a dramatic story, but I visited the Maasai in Africa, and the chief who had read some of my stuff, he gave 2 warriors permission to walk me around the path that a young warrior had to walk to be initiated. And the most moving part was the caves of grief. And these 2 tough-looking guys with spears and shields, and they got even soft-spoken as we approached these caves. And they said, "Here, Father, we had to learn how to cry." And I would explain to the group and say the turning phrase was when I would say, many of you thought your father was an angry man, and maybe he was. Many of you think you are an angry man, and maybe you are. But now listen closely, they'd lead forward. This is by the third day they were teachable. And I said, many of you are not angry, you're sad. And it just, you could see the jolt of recognition. Sadness hides as anger. But once you give permission, a man at least, women have permission already, but we have to give men permission. You're not really an angry man. You're just deeply sad. The whole 5-day event turned in some ways on that one remark, because they wanted to discover the source of their tears. And that led to this book, Tears of Things.